What happens when technology solves survival but doesn't solve meaning? To investigate that problem, we have to go back to 1943 to Abraham Maslow, who proposed a 5-tier model of human psychology and desire. It's a simple framework to help us understand what humans seek after their survival needs have been met. Today, I'm going to walk you through the 5 tiers, and as we make our way to the top of the pyramid towards self-actualization, we'll be asking the question, does any of this have any relevance in a modern real world sense? And ultimately, is there any objective truth to this idea of meaning, this question of meaning that we all stumble upon in our lives eventually? So if you're looking for answers, you're in the right place. This video is for you. It'll cover psychology, societal pressure, and the pursuit of status, all from the perspective of a creative professional. Welcome to Field Notes. If survival is solved, then meaning becomes the crisis. Now that might sound quite scary at first, but I actually take a very optimistic view about technology. You see, I believe that technology isn't morally evil or good in of itself. It's simply an amplifier of human intention. And if you give access to many people around the world, you would hope at least that they use the technology to solve some of the base level issues of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And those problems that people come up against first are matters of shelter, rest, food, warmth, anything to do with keeping the body safe. And the reason I'm hopeful in regards to technology being used for good is simply because of the Industrial Revolution. You say history doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. And the situation with the Industrial Revolution was a lifting of billions of people out of poverty. I think that sense of lifting people out of poverty is forcing people up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There is a sort of moral panic around the tooling that we already have at the moment. I feel like a lot of people want to suggest that it's used for evil and evil intention. But the truth is, it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. As the distance between our mind and action shortens because of the very nature of the technology that is developing around us, if we anticipate that the technology will be used for evil purposes, then evil will be projected onto the world. Whereas if we take a more optimistic approach and we have faith in ordinary people and we distribute these tools to them, then maybe we can come together as a community to really push us towards a utopia where more people have their base level needs met as we rise Maslow's hierarchy of needs together. And there are some interesting cultural reasons as to why so many successful people get to the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and get stuck at the point of self-actualization. And we'll be covering that later in the video. So before we get to the juicy stuff all the way at the top, we need to ground ourselves. First, write down our physiological needs. You see, at the very base of the pyramid, we are concerned with all things body. That is, breathing, eating, sleeping. We've all experienced being sleep deprived and unable to think clearly because we've not eaten our lunch. Well, Maslow's hierarchy of needs suggests that it's quite difficult to be creative when you're literally starving to death. And I don't think there's any arguments there, really. But if we think about it in terms of abundance, if we exist in a society where we have easy access to medicine so we can't get ill, food is taken care of, shelter is taken care of, then we can really enter a post-scarcity world where we no longer have to worry about these physiological needs because they're all attended to through efficient automations run in the background of society. And if those processes are all attended to, then it'd be incredibly easy for humanity as a whole to move up the pyramid to the next tier. Moving on to the next level, it's all to do with safety and security. And this one becomes a little more challenging with modern technology because so much of our status is tied into property. Whether we're renting, homeowners, whether you have a terraced, semi-detached, detached, how expensive your house is, it becomes quite difficult to imagine a world where everyone has a home when the very nature of homes have become a status indicator as well as a place of safety and security. But imagine for the moment that smarter people than you and I have got together to create a world where housing is no longer a problem, that everyone has access to shelter when there's a heat wave, a storm, or when it is freezing outside. You would have permission to fail, recover, and try again. If we had our base level needs met through automation, society could take more risks. This is how the richest families in society exist. It doesn't matter how many of their businesses fail necessarily, because the pot of money funding those businesses tends to be bottomless. Imagine a world where ordinary people have that same access, where they can roll the dice just as much as anyone else. How many influential, emergent, and interesting ideas would we come across as a society if more people than the global elite are able to do that? Moving up to number 3, we have love and belonging. And I've got to say that this position feels kind of strange to think about in terms of automation. But then if you ponder about it enough, you realize the last decade and a half, we already have this part automated by social media. It's very peculiar. I mean, a lot of the influences that you see, you form a parasocial relationship with them. Obviously, they have no idea who you are, but the perception is that they're your friend. At least that's part of the subconscious, that it's tingling when you're interacting with the videos. And it's a bit weird. Maybe it's a bit meta to talk about, because obviously we probably don't know each other, but yet you're watching. Isn't it weird? But in a world of large language models where you can communicate with an AI and it can seem almost like a person, it just raises a lot of questions. And I've got to say, the ethics of it do seem strange to me. I'll disclose it, I've been offered job interviews for companies where they want someone to do the AI character generation and animations of their AI dating characters. Is the only way that I can explain it, and it pays significantly well. Some of these jobs are going for over £100,000 a year, which is a lot of money. But in terms of the ethics of it, it just seems strange. I guess if you support the idea of OnlyFans, and again, that parasocial relationship that some people unfortunately fall into, then maybe the technology opens the market for anyone to be able to offer those kind of companionship services. But still, it's very peculiar and something that I don't feel comfortable with. And I wouldn't be taking a job like that even for £100,000 a year. Beside that point, though, we still crave community. And I'd like to think that with the base level needs of humanity met, that we would find community with each other rather than technology. On the 4th tier, we have our esteem needs. And this is heavily tied into status, how other people perceive us and our achievements. Now, as a creative, it's easy to become obsessed with this level of the pyramid, because the better you're perceived, the more opportunities that you have, the further your career goes. But also, through the very nature of creative people, they tend to be quite modest, people pleasing. And it's not uncommon for creatives to often not get the credit for the work that they've contributed to. It's unfortunately happened to me a dozen times. Sometimes it is just a matter of white labeling. Sometimes you have a producer that maybe takes a disliking for you and just decides to leave you off the credits of a video game. And unfortunately, things like that aren't uncommon. You see, at the level of esteem needs, it starts to become quite challenging to build your own profile. So, one way that capitalists do this is through paying other people for services and then using other people's talents to boost their own sense of self esteem, increase their own status. And many creatives end up in this strange space where they feel themselves lower down Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I know in instances of my own life, I've been closer to the bottom, where I've essentially been working at boosting other people's self esteem. And that can be quite a difficult process because you put all of your talent, time, skills, equipment into doing the work. And when you don't get credit for it and someone else does take credit for it, it can really tear apart at your soul. And I really wish it was more uncommon, but it's very normal in this industry. And there is just a component that feels a little bit gross to come out and talk about your achievements directly. I could tell you that my work has literally contributed to hundreds of millions of views at this point across some of the biggest brand names in tech and gaming. And even though that's true, what did Tywin Lannister say in Game of Thrones? If you have to say that you're a king, then you're not a true king. So creative people are less willing to talk about their experiences because if you're doing it yourself and other people aren't doing it for you, then does it really feel authentic? I could stand here and tell you that I score in the top 0.48% of the Harvard Creative Achievement Questionnaire. It's enough to give you the ick, even though it's true. And just to further the point outside of my own experience, there's currently a big debate going on around the film Obsession, where the art director, Sally Choi, came out and said that she's only made $6,000 from work on the film, even though it's made over 175 million. Now, there is a conversation around above the line and below the line workers. In Sally's case, she argued the fact that she wasn't just an art director. She wore many hats in production and worked under the rate that you would expect for her kind of role. I believe she was paid $300 a day, which is quite low, to be fair. And again, it's not uncommon for this to happen. I've literally worked with agencies where I've been retained by them, budgeted by one client, and then they've given me the work of another client where I have run strategy, produced it, done the copywriting, filmed it, edited, done the motion graphics, the sound, handled delivery and review, and shipped it to the client, only to realize that the middleman agency was making 100% margin on that work. Now, I could sit around and complain and say I only got my day rate, but at the end of the day, I have to be grateful for the fact that I had an opportunity and I'm not leading that agency myself to be able to take that lion's share. And I think in the case of Sally Choi, there have been people who've said that she's very unprofessional for kicking up a fuss about this because, in theory, she should be able to leverage the success of this film to negotiate a better contract in the future. And there is a degree of that which is true, but is also the nature of some of these businesses, some of these above the line people to be very predatory in the sorts of margin that they want to take. And just to loop it back around so you understand the relevance to this self-esteem section of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's just that sense that there is a pay-to-win aspect as you go up the pyramid. And in our current society, you can pay to have other people push you up, but it's also this very thing that causes complications when successful people reach the top of the pyramid. But before we get to the very top, I want to think a moment about the singularity. The moment where technological progress goes parabolic. It expands so quickly, it evolves so fast that we can't even comprehend the change. I think because the singularity goes beyond our comprehension. You could argue the case that the self-esteem section of Maslow's hierarchy of needs could be solved with technology. What happens when there's nothing preventing you from finding your way all the way to the top of the pyramid? And finally, that's what we're going to explore in the next slide. Self-actualization can look like freedom until the self appears. Now, you might have been thinking that when you reach the top of the pyramid, you get to rest, things get easy. That couldn't be further from the truth. See, it reminds me of when people talk about retirement and they have this vision of being on a permanent holiday, where they're at the beach all week, drinking, having a party. But quite quickly, when people get to that stage, they start to feel uncomfortable, uneasy. They feel like they need to do something. They need autonomy. They need creativity. After survival, after safety, after friendship and belonging, esteem and achievement, when you reach the top, you're left with yourself, trying to understand who you really are in relation to the world around you. And that is a scary and sobering thought because there's no clear rung left to climb. And this is where many successful people implode because this part of the pyramid, this part of the journey, is about connecting with the human soul. It's about spontaneity, creativity, exploring the unknown, and learning about the self and how you interact with reality. When I got to the top of the mountain, I literally turned to my dreams. I would note them down in the morning, look for patterns, and see if I could decipher meaning inside of them. Eventually, that actually led me to making a series about Carl Jung's Red Book, where the idea of dream journaling originally came from for me. And the fascinating thing about someone like Carl Jung is he had climbed up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. He'd reached the top and then realized that nothing made sense anymore. He would go into these visions, exploring his self, going to the very depths of hell within his own personality. And what he did was conjure a world of characters and creations that allowed him to have a deeper sense of understanding within the world. Now, I would be forever grateful if you went to check out Carl Jung's Red Book series after this video. But for the time being, we'll get into what self-actualization isn't. And many people often think it's doing what they love. And that's simply not true. Self-actualization is the process of you becoming both the art and the artist, the question and the experiments, the problem and the solution. It gets quite paradoxical and strange. And what I've found is the 7 Hermetic principles seem to tie in quite vigorously at this stage of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And if you want to know more about those 7 principles, I'll leave a link above. The most prominent Hermetic principle that comes to my mind within self-actualization, within this sense of understanding yourself within the world, is the principle of polarity, which concerns itself with the absolute extremes of opposites. This is something, if you read Carl Jung, you'll come across time and time again. Everything is hot and cold. Everything is loving or hateful. There's this stretching of reality that he tests his mind against again and again. And really, at the point of self-actualization, you are integrating with the full parameters of reality. And that can be quite a scary thing. Because as you push your understanding of yourself within the world, you start to understand that you can fit in across this spectrum in ways that you didn't quite understand before. All of a sudden, you start understanding that all of the people around you are eerily similar, even the people that you have dislike for, because you realize that the same parameters that build up their traits also exist within you. Sometimes those traits are subdued, other times they skew a little in the opposite direction. But ultimately, people feel a sense of wholeness and a connection with their fellow man, the better parts, the worst parts. And you get drawn into this sense of wanting wholeness, balance, as you figure out the world around you. And ultimately, we get to the question of whether self actualization could be automated with technology too. Obviously, with the concept of the singularity, future simulations, it all starts to blur and get a little confusing. But for the time being, I'd like to think that we still have our autonomy and that self actualization is a form of human expression and exploration and creativity. And I'll be exploring what creativity means in the sense of self actualization in a later video. I feel very fortunate to have worked in the creative industry for the last decade, seeing the analog to digital switch over, and now seeing AI make its way into the industry as well. I know a lot of people are quite scared and fearful of that, and maybe I'm a bit more optimistic in what it's going to allow people to be able to achieve. But I also understand the fear of change, and I've lived through that change multiple times in my career, with softwares going out of date, workflows going out of date, and even job roles being changed into something new. What I've learned personally about surviving in the creative industry is casting the net fairly wide has been a very useful strategy. Always being willing to learn new things, keeping an open mind, and exploring things that other people are afraid to. In my next video, I'm going to be getting into this split of creativity and mastery. Very much like I've talked about the polarity of opposites during this video, I think that creativity and mastery exist on the same line, and maybe people haven't really thought about that definition, and I want to make it really clear for people and give them an explanation about why I think there is a objective truth to what creativity is. I'm really excited to explore the objective truth about creativity, and I can't wait to show you that in the next video. So please consider subscribing, leave me a comment if you've enjoyed the video, if you've got anything out of it, and I'll see you in the next one.